The HOA Board dialed 911 on me in broad daylight, confident the sound of sirens would force me back into line. HOA Karen stood at the curb with her phone raised like a badge, already rehearsing the version where I became the problem. She said non-compliance the way people say crime, slow and loud, so the neighbors could hear. I didn't argue, didn't step back, didn't soften my voice, because the confrontation had already started. When the patrol car turned the corner, sunlight flashing across the windshield, HOA Karen smiled like the ending was guaranteed. She wanted an audience, and she got one. Lawnmowers stopping mid-strip and doors cracking open along the block. I stood there knowing the call she made couldn't reach where the truth lived. The mailbox she hated, the lawn she measured, the house she claimed. None of it belonged to her authority. The officers stepped out, expecting a defiant homeowner and an obedient board ready with paperwork. What they walked into instead was the first moment HOA Karen's confidence met a boundary it couldn't cross. Before we move forward, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? HOA Karen didn't wait for the officers to speak before launching into her script, pointing at my house like it was evidence already convicted. She told them I refused to comply with HOA standards, that I was hostile, uncooperative, and deliberately undermining community order. Doug, the treasurer, hovered behind her clutching a folder thick with violation notices, nodding hard enough to look official. The way they stood together made it clear this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a performance they'd practiced. They believed the badge would finish what their fines and threats couldn't. The officers listened without interrupting, eyes moving from HOA Karen to me and back again, taking in the scene that didn't quite match her urgency. Perfect lawns, clean sidewalks, no damage, no disturbance, just a board desperate to be obeyed. HOA. Karen kept talking, filling the silence with words like escalation and enforcement, her voice rising each time she realized no one was reacting the way she expected. She wanted me nervous. She wanted me apologetic. She wanted me small. I spoke when one of the officers finally looked my way and asked what the issue was. I told him calmly that I wasn't under the HOA and never had been. That sentence landed wrong in HOA Karen's ears, sharp enough to make her step forward. She cut in immediately, insisting every house on the block fell under their jurisdiction, her tone daring anyone to challenge it. The confidence in her voice came from repetition, not accuracy, and she had no idea how fragile that confidence really was. The officer asked how long the dispute had been going on, and HOA Karen answered for me, listing weeks of violations as if volume equaled validity. I didn't interrupt because every word she added tightened the knot she'd tied around herself. Neighbors leaned closer, drawn in by the shift from routine enforcement to something public and serious. Phones came out quietly, not because anyone wanted drama, but because everyone sensed this wasn't going to end the way HOA Karen planned. When the officer asked for documentation, Doug eagerly opened his folder, spreading papers across the hood of his car like a deck of cards. Fines, warnings, highlighted bylaws, all the usual tools they use to keep people compliant. HOA Karen watched the officers' faces, waiting for recognition, for that nod of authority she relied on. It didn't come. Instead, the questions started, slow and precise, about boundaries, filings, and jurisdiction. I answered only when asked, keeping my tone even, explaining that my property sat outside the HOA's recorded boundary. HOA Karen laughed once, sharp and dismissive, as if facts were optional. She told the officers there was an annexation clause, that visible frontage meant inclusion, that everyone knew that. The officer didn't argue with her, which she took as agreement. She mistook patience for support. As the conversation stretched on, the mood shifted from spectacle to scrutiny. The officers stopped looking at HOA Karen's papers and started looking at the street itself, at the lot lines, at the address numbers. One of them asked me if I had proof of what I was saying. I told him I did, and that I'd already confirmed it with the county. That was the moment HOA Karen's posture changed, just slightly, like someone realizing the floor might not be where they thought it was. The officer asked me to retrieve whatever documentation I had, and I did, walking back to my porch under the weight of a dozen watching eyes. HOA Karen whispered urgently to Doug, her confidence cracking into irritation. She kept glancing at the patrol car like it was supposed to rescue her. I came back with a single folder, thin compared to theirs, but heavier in every way that mattered. As I handed it over, the officer flipped through the pages carefully, scanning maps and seals that didn't care about HOA titles. The street went quiet in a way that felt different from before. Not tense, but expectant. HOA. Karen tried to keep talking, to explain, to reinterpret what was right in front of everyone, but her words started to tangle. The more she spoke, the more exposed the performance became. The officers didn't make any declarations yet, but they didn't need to. The balance had already shifted. HOA Karen had called the cops to force compliance, and instead she'd invited scrutiny. She wanted authority to crush me. What she got was authority asking questions she couldn't answer. By the time the officer closed the folder and looked back at her, the block understood something important had changed. This wasn't about a mailbox or a fine anymore. This was about power meeting proof in public, and HOA Karen realizing too late that she'd escalated into a space where intimidation didn't work. What HOA Karen didn't understand that morning was that none of this started with a mailbox or a rule violation. It started long before she ever raised her phone to dial 911. When I bought that house, I wasn't chasing status or approval. I was buying space and certainty. I work in systems, not politics. And my life has always revolved around knowing where lines are drawn and why they exist. I chose that property because it sat at the edge of the block, quiet, slightly removed, backed by a strip of county-owned land that most buyers overlooked because it didn't come with neat explanations. To me, that strip was breathing room. The purchase itself should have been a warning. It came through a county foreclosure auction, the kind that scares people off because the paperwork isn't packaged neatly. The previous owner had let filings expire, boundaries lapse, details fade into the background. I didn't mind. I read everything myself. Deeds, plats, survey references, all the dry material people assume doesn't matter until it suddenly does. I didn't buy into a neighborhood fantasy. I bought a piece of land with defined edges and recorded history. From the outside, Oakrest looked controlled, even comforting. Identical lawns, approved paint palettes, a rhythm so predictable it almost felt soothing. But control like that never exists without someone enforcing it, and it didn't take long to see who that was. HOA Karen moved through the neighborhood like a supervisor on a factory floor, clipboard always present, smile tight and conditional. People greeted her politely, but never lingered. They complied quickly and spoke quietly. That wasn't respect. That was conditioning. The first notes appeared within days of my move-in, framed as friendly reminders, but written with the same rigid tone. Trash bins, light wattage, parking orientation. Nothing serious on its own, but together they formed a pattern. They weren't trying to help me settle in. They were testing whether I would submit without question. I didn't respond emotionally because I didn't see them as personal attacks. To me, they were data points. What made HOA Karen fixate on me wasn't defiance. It was indifference. I didn't rush to repaint anything. I didn't apologize for existing slightly outside her expectations. I lived the way I always had, quiet, measured, unreactive. That unsettled her more than open resistance ever could. Authority that relies on reaction can't stand being ignored. Neighbors warned me gently at first. They told me she meant well, that she kept property values high, that it was easier to just comply. I listened without agreeing. I'd heard the same logic in corporate environments where bad management survived because no one wanted friction. HOA Karen wasn't unique. She was familiar. What she didn't know was that my authority didn't come from titles or boards. It came from preparation. I document everything by instinct. I don't escalate until I understand the system I'm in better than the people running it. While she relied on repetition and intimidation, I relied on records and verification. The difference between us wasn't attitude. It was foundation. When she sent her first formal violation, complete with section numbers and deadlines, I didn't feel threatened. I felt curious, because authority that has to announce itself that loudly usually isn't as solid as it claims. That curiosity is what led me to look closer at the maps, the filings, the faint boundary lines most people never notice. HOA Karen believed her position gave her ownership over the neighborhood. I believed ownership was something you could point to on paper. That difference would eventually matter more than either of us realized. And when it did, it would strip her authority down to what it actually was. Just noise, waiting for someone willing to check the fine print. Once I stopped viewing HOA Karen as a loud neighbor and started seeing her as a system, everything about her behavior made sense. She didn't operate on fairness or consistency. She operated on pressure. The HOA wasn't a community tool to her, it was a control surface, a way to apply force without ever touching someone directly. Fines replaced conversation. Notices replaced dialogue. Public shaming replaced accountability. And because most people wanted peace more than truth, the system worked. HOA Karen understood something simple and dangerous. If you enforce rules often enough, people stop asking whether those rules are legitimate. They just assume they are. She relied on that assumption every time she walked the block with her clipboard. Every time Doug followed behind her documenting imaginary infractions, every time a warning appeared before sunrise like a quiet threat. The power wasn't in the bylaws themselves, it was in the fatigue they created. I watched how it played out with other neighbors. One house got fined repeatedly for leaving a trash bin visible for 15 minutes too long. Another was cited for a garden that didn't match the approved aesthetic even though it was healthy and well kept. The pattern was clear. Compliance wasn't about maintaining standards, it was about reinforcing who had the final word. HOA Karen never needed everyone to agree with her. She just needed them to comply. The online forum became her amplifier. Posts framed as community concern always targeted the same few properties. Photos were uploaded without consent, addresses cropped just enough to avoid direct blame, while still signaling exactly who was being discussed. Comments stayed cautious, supportive of order without naming the abuse underneath. Silence became participation. If you didn't object, you validated it. When I became the focus, the escalation was deliberate. The first violations were minor, almost reasonable on the surface. Then the language shifted. Non-compliance became defiance. Defiance became threat. The fines grew faster. The emails came more often. The warnings started including phrases about legal escalation and enforcement. She wanted to isolate me, to make me the example that reminded everyone else why resistance wasn't worth it. What made it worse was how confidently wrong she was. HOA. Karen believed longevity equaled legitimacy. She'd been doing this for years, so it never occurred to her that the foundation might be rotten. She enforced beyond her boundary because no one had ever stopped her. The HOA board backed her because she was loud and consistent, and because challenging her meant work. Abuse thrives where effort is avoided. Doug played his role perfectly. He wasn't the architect, he was the muscle. He measured, documented, issued numbers. He turned intimidation into math, which made it feel objective. $75 a day, section numbers, deadlines. It looked official enough that people rarely questioned it. That's how power hides. Not in shouting, but in formatting. The neighbors felt it too, even if they never named it. Conversation stopped when HOA Karen approached. Garage doors closed faster. People checked their lawns more often than they checked their boundaries. Fear doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just tightens routines until everyone forgets they're allowed to breathe. By the time HOA Karen decided to involve the police, the abuse had crossed its final line. She wasn't just enforcing rules anymore. She was criminalizing dissent. Turning a civil disagreement into a law enforcement issue wasn't an accident. It was escalation by intimidation, the ultimate threat when all others fail. She assumed the badge would finish the job. What she didn't understand was that abuse depends on ambiguity. The moment you drag it into the open, it either justifies itself or collapses. By dialing 911, HOA Karen believed she was asserting dominance. In reality, she was inviting scrutiny, and scrutiny is lethal to power that has been operating unchecked. The moment the situation shifted from pressure to certainty was the moment I stopped reacting and started verifying. While HOA Karen escalated emails, fines, and threats, I went quiet. Not because I was intimidated, but because silence is where preparation happens. I didn't need to argue with her interpretations of authority. I needed to confirm where authority actually ended and that meant going past HOA paperwork and straight to the source that never lies for convenience. I started with the county plat maps, not the glossy HOA versions they handed out to residents, but the original survey records filed with the registrar. Those documents don't care about aesthetics or tradition. They care about measurements, filings, and dates. I pulled the most recent map, then the one before it, then the one before that, layering them until a pattern emerged. Oakrest Meadows had been drawn cleanly at first, a defined shape with recorded edges. Then came the proposed expansion, the one HOA Karen liked to reference whenever she needed more reach. That expansion was never completed. The amendment existed only as a proposal, returned for revision, and never resubmitted. On paper, Oakrest Meadows still lived inside its original boundary. Everything beyond that line was never annexed, never approved, never absorbed. My property sat 27 feet beyond that line, not metaphorically, but mathematically. It wasn't close enough to argue. It was outside. To be sure, I didn't rely on my own interpretation. I called the county property office and asked them directly. The clerk didn't hesitate. She pulled up my parcel number, read off the boundary notes, and confirmed what the map already showed. My address fell within an unincorporated county zone. No HOA jurisdiction. No authority to issue violations. No right to collect fines. She said it plainly, without emotion, the way truth usually arrives when it's not trying to impress anyone. That alone would have been enough to protect myself, but it wasn't the end of what I found. As I kept reviewing the records, something else surfaced, faint lines crossing parcels in ways that didn't match the HOA's story. Utility easements, old ones, water, drainage, fiber, infrastructure laid down before Oakrest Meadows ever existed. Those easements didn't stop at HOA boundaries. They cut through them, and several of them ran directly through my land before branching out to serve the rest of the block. That mattered more than it seemed at first. Easements define responsibility and ownership in ways most people never consider. If infrastructure runs through your property, it means someone else is relying on land they don't fully control. I cross-referenced the easements with current ownership records and realized the HOA had been maintaining and collecting dues for facilities built on land they never legally acquired. The retention area behind the clubhouse, the pedestrian path connecting the park, even part of the clubhouse footprint itself. All of it traced back to parcels that had reverted to county control years ago when the original developer dissolved. The deeper I went, the clearer the picture became. HOA. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules beyond her boundary. The HOA itself was operating on assumptions no one had bothered to confirm. They didn't own what they claimed to manage. They didn't govern what they claimed to control. Their authority was real only because no one had challenged it with documentation. I went to the county registrar in person to confirm what the records suggested. The office smelled like old paper and coffee that had been reheated too many times. An archivist pulled the original filings, flipping through pages with practiced indifference. He showed me the returned annexation proposal, the missing transfer deeds, the unclaimed parcels. He stamped copies, certified them, and slid them across the counter without ceremony. To him, this wasn't a scandal. It was just paperwork no one had finished. Back home, I laid everything out on my table. Maps, certified records, emails, notices, a clean timeline of escalation on one side and an unbroken chain of legal proof on the other. HOA. Karen's threats suddenly looked small against documents that didn't care who was loudest. By the time the police asked me for proof that morning, it was already complete. I wasn't improvising. I wasn't guessing. I was handing them a reality HOA Karen had ignored for years. And in that moment, standing on the street with neighbors watching, I realized something important. This wasn't just about defending myself anymore. This was about exposing a system that had mistaken habit for authority, and habit collapses the second it's forced to stand on paper. The confrontation didn't explode. It unraveled, and that made it worse for HOA Karen. She expected authority to land like a hammer, quick and final, but what unfolded instead was slow exposure, each second stretching longer than the last. When the officer finished reviewing the documents and looked back at her, He didn't raise his voice or shift his stance. He simply asked her to explain how the HOA claimed jurisdiction over a property that the county records placed outside its boundary. That question hit harder than any accusation could have, because it demanded precision instead of confidence. HOA Karen tried to answer it the way she always answered challenges, by talking faster and louder. She referenced community standards, visible frontage, historical enforcement, the same circular logic she'd used for years to keep people compliant. The officer let her finish without interruption, then calmly explained that enforcement history didn't override recorded boundaries. Doug tried to jump in, waving the annexation clause again like a talisman, but the officer stopped him mid-sentence and asked for proof of county approval. The silence that followed was the kind that strips power away. Neighbors leaned forward as if drawn by gravity. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was authority dissolving in real time. HOA Karen's posture stiffened, her shoulders rising as if she could physically hold herself together through sheer will. She accused me of manipulation, of deliberately misleading the board, of hiding technicalities. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The documents were doing the talking, and they were far more convincing than either of us. The officer explained, slowly and clearly, that the HOA had no legal standing to issue fines, notices, or threats against my property. He added that repeated attempts to enforce non-existent authority could constitute harassment. That word landed differently. Harassment wasn't something HOA Karen had ever imagined being associated with her role. She'd built her identity on enforcement, on being the person who kept order. Hearing that word applied to her actions caused something to crack behind her eyes. Doug's confidence collapsed next. He stopped clicking his pen. His voice dropped when he asked whether the existing fines were valid. The officer answered honestly, "No. Any fines issued outside jurisdiction are unenforceable." A murmur rolled through the crowd, not loud, but unmistakable. People were doing mental math, counting notices, remembering checks they'd written without question. The realization spread outward, neighbor by neighbor. HOA Karen tried to regain control by reframing the situation as a misunderstanding that could be resolved privately. She suggested the board would review the matter internally, that further communication should go through their legal counsel. The officer shut that down gently, but firmly, explaining that calling 911 over a civil dispute without jurisdiction was inappropriate and could not be repeated. He wasn't threatening her. He was documenting her. That distinction mattered. At that point, something shifted in the crowd. This wasn't just my confrontation anymore. People started asking questions out loud. One neighbor wanted to know whether their own lot had been properly annexed. Another asked if the HOA had authority over the walking path. The officer answered what he could and advised anyone with concerns to contact the county directly. HOA Karen watched the conversation slip out of her control, her clipboard suddenly useless. She made one last attempt to assert dominance by declaring the hearing adjourned, her voice sharp with panic. No one moved. The folding chairs stayed filled. The officer remained where he was. Doug looked at her, uncertain, waiting for direction that didn't come. In that moment, her authority didn't just weaken, it evaporated. The officer turned to me and confirmed, in front of everyone, that I was within my rights and under no obligation to comply with HOA directives. He suggested that any further contact from the board regarding enforcement could be considered improper. That confirmation didn't come with applause or celebration. It came with understanding, the kind that changes how people see a system they'd trusted out of habit. HOA Karen stood there, exposed, her power stripped down to what it really was, a routine that had never been tested, a confidence built on people not wanting trouble. When she finally turned and walked away, there was no dramatic exit, just a woman retreating under the weight of scrutiny she'd invited herself. The patrol car pulled away shortly after, leaving behind a block that felt different, quieter, but not empty. Conversations started in low tones. Neighbors looked at each other with new awareness, and as I stood there watching the scene disperse, I understood that this wasn't the end of the conflict. It was the moment it became irreversible. The public collapse had happened, and once power breaks in daylight, it never fully recovers. The collapse of public authority didn't end the problem. It simply exposed how much of it had been held together by bluff. Once the patrol car disappeared and the neighbors drifted back to their routines, HOA Karen stopped making noise and started looking for angles. Silence from people like her isn't acceptance. It's regrouping. I knew that, which is why I didn't treat the confrontation as a finish line. I treated it as clearance to move openly. While the board scrambled to contain reputational damage, I shifted the fight into a space where intimidation couldn't survive. Paper, records, experts. The same county filings that stripped HOA Karen of jurisdiction also revealed something she never imagined being vulnerable. The HOA didn't just enforce beyond its boundary. It operated infrastructure on land it didn't legally own. Retention areas, walkways, utility buffers. Common ground everyone assumed belonged to the association was sitting in limbo, unclaimed after the original developer dissolved years earlier. Those parcels didn't look important on a map unless you knew what to look for. Thin strips, awkward shapes, places people walked across without thinking. But they were structural. They carried drainage, access, and legal dependency. When ownership lapses, land doesn't disappear. It waits. And while HOA Karen had been busy writing fines, no one had been paying attention to tax records quietly ticking toward foreclosure. I attended the county auction without announcement or drama, just another bidder with documents already reviewed and limits already calculated. There was no competition. The parcels weren't attractive to anyone who didn't understand their leverage. When the clerk stamped the deeds and slid them across the counter, she didn't congratulate me. She just asked if I understood what I'd purchased. I told her I did. She nodded the way people do when they realize you're not guessing. Ownership changes things instantly, but only if it's verified. That's where the experts came in. I retained a property attorney who specialized in land disputes and municipal oversight, not to threaten, but to document. We walked the parcels together, matching deed descriptions to physical space, confirming easements and dependencies. Every step was logged. Every conclusion supported by records the HOA had never bothered to read. When the next HOA meeting was announced, I didn't attend alone. I arrived with documentation, legal counsel, and a county deputy carrying verification copies. The room shifted the moment we walked in. HOA Karen tried to block participation, insisting the meeting was for members only, but the words didn't land anymore. Authority without ground is just sound. The attorney presented the facts without emotion. Parcel numbers, transfer dates, recorded ownership, the land under the clubhouse, the walking path, the retention area. All privately owned now, not seized, not contested, purchased legally, and recorded properly. HOA. Karen accused me of extortion, her voice sharp with panic, but the accusation collapsed under its own weight. Ownership isn't coercion, it's reality. The deputy confirmed it calmly. The HOA had no authority over the parcels and no right to operate facilities on land it didn't own. That confirmation hit harder than the police encounter days earlier, because this time there was no misunderstanding to hide behind. The board wasn't mistaken. They were exposed. Neighbors watched the exchange with a mixture of disbelief and relief. The same people who'd been fined, warned, and monitored for years were now watching the structure that controlled them realize it had no legal foundation. Doug stopped taking notes. HOA Karen stopped interrupting. The room didn't erupt. It settled. I made one thing clear before leaving. I wasn't there to shut anything down. I filed temporary use agreements to allow continued access while the HOA resolved its status. This wasn't revenge, it was correction. The attorney explained that continuing to operate without addressing ownership could invite serious legal consequences. That was the final blow. Expert verification doesn't shout. It closes doors quietly. And as I walked out of that meeting, I knew HOA Karen understood something she'd never faced before. You can intimidate neighbors. You can weaponize rules. But once experts step in and paper takes over, power based on habit doesn't just weaken. It ends. The end didn't arrive with cheers or speeches. It arrived the way truth always does when it's finished its work, quietly and without asking permission. HOA. Karen stopped sending emails first. No more bold subject lines. No more threats dressed up as procedure. Then Doug went silent too. The measurements, the spreadsheets, the endless documentation evaporating overnight like they'd never existed. The board didn't announce a retreat. They simply stopped acting like they were in charge, which was the most honest thing they'd done in years. By the following week, the HOA website flickered and disappeared. The forum that once cataloged violations and shamed neighbors went dark without explanation. Screenshots circulated briefly, then even those stopped. There was nothing left to argue about. The county issued a short verification confirming what everyone already knew by then, that Oakrest Meadows no longer held legal authority over the parcels it claimed, that enforcement operations were suspended pending dissolution. The language was clinical, indifferent, devastating. Resignations followed without ceremony. One board member emailed a generic statement about personal reasons. Another returned their clubhouse key and said nothing at all. Doug's message came last, short and stripped of bravado, admitting they'd enforced rules without fully understanding the law. No one replied. There was nothing to add. HOA Karen didn't make a statement. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. Her house went quiet instead, curtains closed, driveway empty. Then one morning, before the sun fully cleared the roofs, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. The same lawn she once measured for compliance now sat under a sign advertising immediate availability. Neighbors noticed but didn't comment. Silence did enough. The neighborhood changed without trying to. Lawns stayed cut, but they stopped matching. Someone planted wildflowers. Another painted their mailbox a color that would have triggered a warning before. Kids rode bikes a little faster. Chalk appeared on sidewalks. Conversations lingered longer in driveways. No one asked permission anymore because there was no one left who could pretend to grant it. I formalized the temporary use agreements and donated portions of the land back to shared access, filing everything properly so no one would ever have to guess again. A small plaque went up near the park, simple and unremarkable, stating one sentence that didn't need explanation. Respect is stronger than rules. People walked past it every day without stopping, which meant it had done its job. Weeks later, someone taped a thank you note to my mailbox. Not signed, just a sentence about neighbors not being suspects anymore. I took it inside and put it away. It didn't need to be displayed. HOA Karen's house sold quickly. A moving truck came and went without incident. No one gathered to watch. No one waved. When Doug stood at the curb one last time, he nodded once and left. That was it. No confrontation, no closure conversation. Power like hers doesn't deserve a final word. The street returned to its rhythm, but it wasn't the old one built on compliance. It was quieter in a different way, the way places sound when no one is waiting to be corrected. I still drink my coffee on the porch some mornings, looking at the same mailbox that started everything. It hasn't changed. It doesn't need to. HOA Karen went silent.